Welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I am Nerder Doug, and I am ready to rev my engines for a discussion about races with this nerd. Even though
I
that's
don't
not
think we're
exactly
talking about those kind of races, although
no,
we
but
could.
but I couldn't think of a cool intro
Yeah,
pun.
yeah.
I like
Nerdarchy Steve. Well, it's funny because I always I always look for a gift to share out
it.
on Twitter when I right before we start,
Oof, man,
and
that's a loaded one to search for.
I put D&D races, and
Oh,
I was like, I bet this is going to show a bunch of like racing, like like indie racing and stuff like that.
oh yeah, there's probably like some racing company called like D&D Racing.
Yeah, yeah. That would be funny if they did have their own NASCAR.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you mean like an actual like Dungeons and Dragons NASCAR?
Yeah,
Yeah, why
yeah.
not, man? Slap it on there. They do it on everything else, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's true. They got rings now. They're doing jewelry.
Yeah, clothes, life,
Yeah.
a decor for your home.
Dungeons and Dragons lingerie. You name it. It's out there.
Still no
Okay.
flamethrower yet though.
No flamethrower.
The kids love that one.
It is.
But yeah, so yeah, we're talking about races tonight, which we just threw out there as the topic, to discuss. Which we obviously we're thinking of, like you said, like tieflings and elves and dwarves, but it also does mean other things, and there's a lot of precedent and official material and my own games about actual like races in D&D too,
Yeah.
so we can touch on that.
I mean, in my Under the Dome game, like the very first session was a race,
We got a
and
whole sub module for that.
yeah, yeah. There's also what is there? There's on DM's Guild. Isn't there like a dinosaur race?
The Tomb of Annihilation has dinosaur races in
Yeah.
Port Nyanzaru, which were super popular part of that adventure. Wildbound and the Witchlight has giant snail races, thing that for characters to engage with. So yeah, I mean, like I said, we'll discuss the fantasy races. But I was thinking when I was thinking about like races,
Yeah.
speed races. I mean, it is a pretty compelling thing, and I was like, why is it? They usually are like popular parts of adventures, and I think it's part of it, at least it's because it has that competitive nature to it, and there's tension and everything, but nobody's life is at stake generally. I mean, you could have a Death Race 2000 style thing too, which would be totally awesome because I love those kind of car combat movies and games and stuff. But do you think that's true? I mean, a race can have tons of tension and drama and like near misses and collisions and stuff, but nobody's gonna like. It's not like you're like racing to the death.
That's not the goal. I've always said that to have a fun and interesting role playing session, have a game session, you need to have drama and tension. Oftentimes, I don't know if it's lack of experience or because the game points us in that direction a lot. It's done through combat, right? That's where that tension comes from.
Right.
But there's other ways of interjecting tension into a game other than just your life is in peril. Those are the only stakes.
Right.
One of the early one shots for 5e I ran was centered around I think it's the Four Winds race in Sharn for Eberron.
Oh, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's Melian's Gate is where all the like monster races live.
Mm-hmm.
And
Droam. That's where like the hags
that's the
are.
kingdom.
Oh.
Okay. Melian's Gate is actually in Sharn.
Oh, that's like
it's like the hood, but it's all the monster races live there.
They have a foothold there.
Yeah, and so the premise was that their racer has gone missing, their mount, which was a giant bat, and the Dalkir were using it to perform a ritual, so they were hired to find and rescue.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
The giant bat. It was a lot of fun. It was way back when, and like Lloyd Collins.
That's just a cool world. That's just a cool setting. I don't normally get very gaga about settings, but Eberron's just cool.
It is one of the few settings that I've run quite a bit of material in. Lloyd Collins was in that game, and he didn't know what to do with his money, so he just bought like 10 Mastiffs. Which I totally respect that.
And actually to tie that in, one of the things that makes that setting so neat, and like many D&D settings, but that one just did it in a cool way, is sort of reimagine the races that are presented in the player's handbook in different ways, and just doing that, can make a huge difference in like how the adventures go, what the world's like, just people's reactions to it. It's fun.
I don't know that this is true, but it feels like Eberron was the first official D&D world to kind of non-standardize the alignments of the monsters.
Yes, I know what you mean. It's like I don't know, like 100%. Like that was the first time that ever happened, but certainly it was a big,
But on that
big
scale,
draw.
Yeah. Like even like because you had the Dargoon. I think it's Dargoon, the Kingdom of Dargoon, which is all the goblinoids and
Darkoon,
and then you had Drome, right? And so certainly in those kingdoms there was probably plenty of evil monsters and goblinoids, but they were also depicted as having ones that would have been good or neutral. And then like I think the default for the orcs in Eberron was more of a neutral, not good or bad. It's just like
they were the gatekeepers that like kind of watched out for like planar threats and things, a lot of druids and stuff.
Yeah. Isn't that kind of a little bit like the World of Warcraft orcs?
I don't know. Even that though, it's just like even that though kind of like begs the question though, like when you're thinking of like D&D races, you hear that word a lot, like, oh, they're monolithic. It's like, well, even that, it's like, oh wow, this is neat because all the orcs are druidic gatekeepers. Like all of them, you know what I mean? It's like, isn't it? They're like, don't they get a Rumspringa or anything where they're just like, yeah, I don't want to get to go travel Sharn for a year, and it's like, how do you go back to the farm after that, right?
Well, like with like
it's just a monolith. It's like, but they're good. It's like everyone is, like they all care about the same thing.
I would say with the orcs though, like in that particular one, I don't think it was like that. I feel like that was an ancient religion that a lot of them followed. But it's like pick a modern country where like this is the main religion,
right?
And then to whatever extent people will follow it.
So there is a comment in the chat that was one of my bullet points that I wanted to get to early. So let's do that. So Jason Earl says, I feel like Wizards of the Coast missed the boat by not changing it from race to species. I totally disagree. I don't know if they'll change it to ancestry or whatever. And it's like, yes, we can talk all we want. It's like, it's confusing and doesn't mean the same thing. But it's like, look, it just is what it is. It means that too. And species sounds too scientific to me. And it's just a staple of the game. It's just like, I understand, and that might just be me being like stubborn. It's like, I understand. It's like it like carries connotations for some people. It's like, well, that's their problem. I mean, it's just a word, And it's like in the context of the game, it does mean species, but
species is tough because it does feel very much like the wrong genre for it. And then like, and then other games have already claimed ancestry.
Right. Yes, I think it'd be right. Yeah, I agree. Versus like if they changed it to like ancestry, be like, that's kind of cheesy.
So
that's just what your competitor did.
Well, they did it. Shadow the Demon Lord calls it ancestry as well.
That really popular DM's Guild supplement also, uses that.
Ancestries.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like Paizo invented the word, so.
Right.
They just kind of read the room and kind of recognized this might be a good shift.
Yeah. Now a big part of this, discussion, it's kind of funny because you guys just shot that video, so I don't want to like spoil it or waste what.
Yeah, because as a kind of sneak preview, tomorrow that video is going out, so we're.
Is it tomorrow? Okay.
Yeah, so we're kind of in tomorrow's video. We're talking about backgrounds, race, and culture, kind of in the context of 1D&D, and it's been something like on my mind for a while, and and we're finally gotten around to putting it out, so it'll go out tomorrow. Mid-morning or so.
Yeah, and that touches on a lot of like the weirdness of the game and just like kind of inconsistencies, like you're bringing up in the video of just like. It's like, well, you want to have it where they're sort of generic, but you also want there to be some kind of, narrative hook for the players too. and it just seems really clunky. And I think the concept that you guys discussed, which is similar to something I've mentioned ad nauseum for years from that hyperlanes idea, is just having a fourth component to your character, which is like your race is a combination of like physical, biological features and cultural features. And I think that'd be an interesting direction to go. Because that's really what, they want to get down to, right?
Yeah,
and that's what players want to do too. Where it's just like, well, even if you world build this, you're intricate, and it's like I have a place for all these races. It's like maybe a player that's playing a dwarf doesn't imagine their characters like that. So it's like, is every dwarf in the world like a stone cutting mountain dweller, or is there room for other things?
And I guess that's the problem with some of the racial features, right? Is like it does kind of pigeonhole you in with features like stone cutting. Like stone cutting is a perfect example, and it's unless they eventually go with like dwarves are actually descended from from the elemental plane of earth or something of that nature, and just really lean into the fantastical and mythical with them. And because even now, like they put out there, they've replaced stone cutting with tremor sense. But I feel like stone cutting I've seen used a lot in games. Anytime someone's playing a dwarf and you're like in underground setting where there's architecture, they're like, I have stone cutting. What does that tell me about this thing?
Well, it's weird. I mean, it's such a like a nuanced and complex thing. So, like that's a great example. It's like, well, in a way, if you kind of like just boil it down, it's like they took away a player, away an entry point for players that isn't related to combat, and just made it like a mechanical benefit that helps you in combat. But it's not all about combat, right? The game is not, what I'm saying? It's just like, and what I mean by that is like, well, like skills. There's so much of the game that they do that is explained in the rules and even provides guidance, but just nobody looks at that, and I don't know why they just ignore their own material in that way. And what I mean is like a skill, right? It's like, well, I can't just like press the history button and get what I want. You have to like role play that of like, well, like you just said, where it's just like, well, if you're playing a dwarf and they have stone cunning and you're, trying to figure out what to do next in the dungeon, you think, well, like, can I look at the stone? I mean, I know about stone, and rather than say like, can I make a history check because I have stone cunning? It's like, just play the character, and that benefit will come up because of how you played them. Whereas like something like, tremor sense is just like, well, I can't be surprised because I would have felt them, It's like, that's just not that interesting. Like, there's nothing interesting about having tremor sense. Now, there could be, I'm sure players would be like, well, can I like put my hand against the wall and see if I can feel anything or whatever? I can imagine.
It's kind of like an absolute, right? Like tremor sense compared to stone cunning. I know I played the Middle Earth Adventures, which is based off the 5e rules. I was playing a dwarf, and being a dwarf, you have stone cunning, but also I think I had a mining background, and there was like a puzzle we had to figure out. And I was like, well, can I use my experience being a miner and surveying the land to figure this puzzle out? It was like a big statue that had been destroyed. And I'm like, am I able to figure out like, what that statue would have been like before it was destroyed, and what direction would have been pointing, how would the sun hit it, things of that nature, and use it as part of, one, we're just trying to solve a puzzle, but two, also going, oh, what is my character's lived experiences, of being a dwarf and a miner, and possibly because even though you're mining, but also like if you start above ground before you begin your mine, you have to survey everything. And, find out where the precious metals.
You were role playing, in other words.
Yeah. So it gives you a chance to kind of explore the world and the character and role play through that, and I kind of enjoyed that, and it was a way to use the background for that character, in their tool proficiencies, not just what can I hit with my axe or my hammer.
Yeah. Actually, that kind of, in a weird way, relates to what we we're saying about like speed races too, and the stakes, in the sense of, it makes me think like, well, the most dangerous part of the game is combat, right? And it's a special part of the game that gets its own, trigger word and everything. Roll for initiative. It's like, that's the phrase that lets everybody know, okay, we're playing a different part of the game now that's different from all the other parts of the game because you could die, right? So it's like, perhaps that's part informing these design decisions with races and things like that, where it's like, look, people are all into role playing these days and they're just going to do that anyway. And, if it makes sense narratively, then you can just ignore the rules because the rules are cool, right? But it's like, but in combat, you got to have like, I need hard things that are going to keep me alive, which is kind of funny because in fact it's incredibly hard to die anyway. But
Yeah,
that's a Critical Role notwithstanding.
Unless you're playing with Ted.
Yeah, well, you know what I mean. But yeah, so maybe that is part of it. It's just like, well, crunchy players like to have crunchy mechanics and powers, and real narrative players dread dying. So having more combat survivability options helps them too. And people that aren't into role playing aren't going to care either way, and people that are just going to do that. Whereas in the sense of like, they probably wouldn't even matter that they had stone cunning or a history proficiency, because it's like, well, it makes sense that my character would. Like, yeah, you can have advantage on that or whatever.
Yeah.
And I am probably one of those people. It's like, yeah, I'll just lean into the. It's like, yeah, that sounds cool.
So real quick, before we get to your question, with Easy Roller Dice is the sponsor for Nerdarchy and our live chat here Monday nights. So I want to thank them. And there's a special promo code down in the description box that you can go check out to get a 25% off one time on your first order. So you can check that out. Thanks to Easy Roller Dice. You got all kinds of cool, awesome dice over there. So have y'all play tested the races, etc. for 1D&D or any comments? We do have plenty of comments. I will say we haven't directly play tested some of everything from there, but some of this stuff has actually come up over the years in our games and in our own games, trying to tweak things. Especially like I when I look at the critical hit rules that they're playing with, it really makes me think about things that we've kind of messed with in the recent years and the problems that we have come up with. And we're going to probably do, or not probably, we'll end up doing a video on that and talking to that directly. But we haven't had time. One, Ted is off globe trotting for one thing, and two, like we have a bunch of regular games going on, and we really weren't going to stop them and test these things out to see how they work. But honestly, some of this stuff you can just look at and you can see how it's going to play out and work, right? Like dwarves really overall, just they were already one of the better races as far as I'm concerned, like their particular package, and it feels like they just kind of got better.
Yeah.
Depending on what kind of class combination you're going to do with them.
And it's kind of a weird play test too, because it's like, well, nothing else in the game has different versions, so it's like it's sort of moot. Like if you're playing, if you played through like Out of the Abyss or whatever, but like we made our characters like this, it's like, well, nothing else in that whole experience has anything to do with that. So it's like, you're not really testing it against the other parts of the game that it will be a part of.
Yeah, it's like just this one specific slither. Maybe once they release more of the playtest rules, we'll start combining them, and then we'll do some like specific games where we play those and test those out. But there's not enough for us to go, all right, let's switch up our characters that we're playing in our ongoing games and see how this works.
Right. But we certainly looked through it and have things we like. In fact, you and I have like a completely opposite thoughts on one particular thing from there, so that'd be interesting.
Well, it actually dovetails right into what we're talking about too. So we're talking about D&D races and the Ardling, and you're kind of digging it, and I'm not really feeling it.
Yeah, my first impression from when I looked at the UA was like, oh, cool, this is like updating Aasimar and making them more distinct. And, of course, like that's a fair comparison. There's celestial things. And, I don't think that is the case. I wish it was. And I certainly expressed that in my survey that I replied back. Because I think Aasimar are just sort of boring. It's like nobody ever really plays them like like I've never seen anybody reference their angelic guide, for instance, right? Or like anything about being a celestial. And I'm all for D&D just like leaning into the fantastical more and like especially their own sort of brand of fantasy. And to me, my first thought was like, oh, they're like Cardinals from earlier editions, and even in this, I don't know. I've looked at them. I actually just don't think they exist in 5e, but a lot of celestial things from previous editions had animal heads, like Solars and all those. I don't even remember, but there was like a dog-headed thing,
Cardinals or something like that.
Yeah, Cardinals. Yeah. They were just like tiered celestials, the same as demons and devils, which I think is a much better parallel with tieflings. And I love the artlings. I hope they stick with that.
Yeah, my thing is they just took an animal head and slapped it on an Aasimar, and I'm like, kind of, like if they made it more unique and gave it like their own power set.
They did to some extent. They have those different spells whether they're exalted.
Which is very in line with the Aasimar abilities, in my opinion. I would have liked to seen something a little more unique for them.
I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Or I guess are they just going to ditch Aasimar altogether in favor of those?
I hope so. Here, well, let me proffer this. Maybe this will, because what I'm looking at it from is nothing to do with being animalistic at all. That's purely cosmetic, and like I said, like that sort of D&D lore. Like even though Solar, like the dog-headed Solar, didn't have like a bite or a bark or anything. It just that's how they look. So like when I said that, I wasn't thinking like, oh, why can't I like pounce with my cat or fly with my eagle head? It's like because it's just your head. Like it doesn't have it's irrelevant what animal it is.
Exactly, it's irrelevant.
Right. So it's just, just by that same token, it's like, well, you can't, tieflings have horns. You can't gore somebody with them, right? It's like, no, they're just cosmetic. That's how they look.
Yeah.
Right?
You want to gore things, be a minotaur.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So, yeah, I guess, like, it's just weird to me. I was not overly impressed.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'm not, no judgment. So I just thought it was fun and cool. Like I said, I like that kind of stuff.
Before jumping in here, I was like, how many D&D races are there? Because there's a ton now. So there's like 59-ish with a little bit of overlap just because I looked on D&D Beyond and it breaks it down by book. So I tried not to do a whole lot of the overlapping, but I'm sure I got one or two sub-races in there in that 59 anyway. But if you were to add all the sub-races, it's probably closer to like 80. Choices that you have. So we're definitely not starved for choices, but for all of the different varieties of creatures you can be in D&D, we still do not have a canine race that's playable.
Yeah, that is unusual. I mean, it's like I don't care, but it is like notable, right? It's just like
I'm kind of a dog person. I love my puppers. The cats in my house are generally assholes.
Oh, by the way, to answer your meme on the Nerdarchy Facebook page, I am a Leon person. I think they're cooler than Tabaxi.
Yeah. I am intrigued by the Leonin and would like to play one of them at some point.
I had a blast playing one in Steven's game.
Yeah. Particularly, I feel like they'd make a fun barbarian.
Yeah, there's a... Oh, boy. You guys did a video a long time ago, and it mentioned something about Leonin, and a bunch of people. It was around the time one of our beardomancy things came out, and somebody was like, "Oh, they should be a beardbarian because they could use their mane like that." Yeah. So I wrote a post on the site about that, and there's like an NPC version of it too. That was a lot of fun. Yes, Shifter could be canine, but at today's point, it's just like, shifter could be feline too. It's like, I want a dog man. Like, where's my dog man?
Yeah, yeah. Like they can be shifters can be anything, right? Depending on what variety you go
They're
with.
shifty.
Which I do love me some shifters. Like that was one of the really cool um additions from Eberron, and if anything, I think it leans more into the into the wear touch than the animal
Yeah.
like the animal part of it.
Right.
So,
Right.
but I mean that being said, it's really cool. Like that was one of the best things about Eberron was getting the new races of Changeling, Kalistar,
Yeah, I like
Warforged, and
Kalashtar.
Shifter.
So yeah, let's check the comments here. So Owl says, I feel dwarves are highly underappreciated in D&D. There's only 3 playable dwarf races. There are 6 or 9 elf races.
I can
There is
explain
so
that
many
for
elves.
you. I can
Oh,
explain
go
that
ahead.
for you, right? They're still trying to get the elf right, but once you hit the mountain dwarf, there was nothing else you really needed.
They peaked. Yeah. One of our recent stuff D&D people posts was about elves.
Yeah.
And I don't get too in depth in those, but yeah, just looking up, there is so many freaking elves, and not even just in 5e, of which even there's a ridiculous amount.
They haven't even added them all yet.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah, there's and it gets so new. It's like there's wood elves, and then there's also wild elves and high elves and gray elves, and sea elves, and also aquatic elves, which are slightly different. Sun elves and moon elves. Dark elves.
We don't have any
Avariel, yeah. The Grugak, was like a distinct thing. And, it's funny. A lot of over the years, I've just looked very closely at a lot of D&D and third-party material for posts on the website and everything. And I just was looking at something the other day, and I thought, there's so many different character options and official stuff and third-party things that really aren't that cool or exciting, other than the flavor that they, you know what I mean? It's when you break it down, it's this just does the same thing. You're there's many things that do they're exactly the same as something else. It's just flavored differently or whatever. It's ooh, that's neat. It's
I think Kobold Press, they've got the Earth sign, right?
Kobold Press are the masters of just developing content for for D&D, in my opinion. For that very reason, it's we talked about this offline the other day. It's they got Midgard, and it's got all these different areas and all these different things. And it's I don't really get the impression anybody cares a whole lot about Midgard per se. People aren't playing in that world. There are. It's not a huge draw. But they just whenever they have a new product, they can just kind of curate well, what do people like right now? It's people like bear folk. It's well, let's make shadow bear folk then for the shadow supplement. It's we got shadow bear folk and shadow goblins and shadow hedgehog people. I forget what the term, Ursina or something. It's just a made up word.
We need armadillo people.
Yeah, it's just it's and I am. That's the stuff I'm curious about to see in the 1D&D. I don't think they will do that sort of generic. I'm not saying Kobold Presses, but a sort of build your own race from generic components.
Right? That's what Hyperlane does.
Yeah, not that rather than even have elf. It's just there's just nothing, right? You just make it up. It's you pick a biological component and a cultural component. So that Hyperlanes, it would be a reptilian, from a artistic society or something like that. You're more creating not their entire race, but it's where you're from, here's what that culture is like.
Christopher Sparks. I love Tome of Beasts. Which one? Isn't there 7 of them now?
There's 3, and then there's 2 creature codexes, right? And then there's another month.
There's so many monsters.
I actually like their setting type books the most. Because they also include those monsters, and I don't know, I just like the way they do it. I can go on about that. But yeah, here's some examples from that Hyperlane stuff, the cultural thing. Aloof, bureaucratic, honorable, ruthless, and those things give you it's sort of another building block, right? You get one of your ability scores goes up by 1. You get a language, and then 1 special, feature that does something neat. And then there's, there's the physiology things like arachnoid, humanoid, all that. Oh, speaking of that, reminded me saying the humanoid. That's another area where it's like getting weird. And it's like, I'm curious, are they going to revise all the spells types? Because like there's a lot of races where they have to really stretch your suspension of disbelief to be like, why is this a humanoid again? or like have a trait just so they don't get penalized by not being able to be affected by like spells.
There's that. I feel like that's like the easiest way, but even still, it doesn't cover them all because I'm pretty sure some of the enchantment or charm spells, like it specifically calls out humanoid type, right? And well, that's fine, but I'm playing a Thri-kreen, so I'm a monstrosity, or I'm playing a plasmoid, so I'm an ooze. So that sounds like humanoid problems to me. When
those are especially are particularly interesting because actually they all are, because there by the same token there's a lot of spells that specifically only target those things, like magic circle. It's like, well, if you're a fae, if you're a centaur, I don't remember, so something's a fae, right? Fairy, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, now you can be thwarted by magic circle, and that's something like that's something player characters never had to worry about before. or like protection from good against evil would protect the enemies from you.
What about satyrs? Are they humanoid or are they fae?
I don't remember. That's Ravnica was a long time ago, so I'm going to say humanoid because they didn't start dabbling in that kind of stuff.
Well, and they also got updated too.
Did they? Oh yeah, because they're in Warden Keenan's or
Monsters of the Multiverse.
Well, let's find out.
They're fae. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, like a bad guy spellcaster could cast protection from evil on themselves, and it would protect them from your satyr character.
And it should, because they're so good anyway. They're you start with magic resistance and you just go on from there, and they just get better. So
yeah.
So that's definitely a thing. Let's see.
I'm looking at the thing right now. That's actually a good example to me of something that's, like it sort of works, right? Like all those components, like there's nothing really that you feel like is so cultural. Maybe their skills, but they're like magical in nature because they're fae, so I can give that a pass. Whereas like your god makes you magically awesome with guns is just dumb.
Yeah.
But like all their other things, it's just like you can jump really high, you can ram people with your head, and you have magic.
So Parks had asked, have we seen all the art of different dog centaur races? I have not, and I'm not sure what combination. Is it like a person on a English bulldog body, or I'll have to check that out and see what that looks like, if they have dog heads or not.
Well, there's a lot of interesting comments. Yeah, again, a lot of what people are saying is sort of landing like where I think we are too. Like Al says, speaking of dwarves, they're one of the original races, like elves and humans. What about the Azer race of fire dwarves? And it's like, yeah, if you want to give people the tools to like, make characters that really just embody their fantasy, like I just want to see them go like all the way. It's just like I guess to that point, it's like, well, you could just play a fire genasi and describe them as short and bearded or whatever. You know what I mean? Which
because a lot of those races have also changed it to where like it could be medium or small, right? It doesn't. You're not necessarily.
Yeah, and I guess it's probably very challenging as a game. Well, we're doing it right now with Mafia, so it's a challenge of game design, and then on a massive scale and scope like D&D, to think like, well, how far do we want to go, right? Like that. Thinking of something like elemental templates, it's like, do we want everything to be generic and just like, and just have like all those little like specific things, like, well, if you're a fire dwarf, then you do this, or do you want to have a generic like, well, if you want to be a fiery whatever, you can pick this template, or just be generic, like, and say, oh, you can just play your fire genasi character and describe them as that. And it's like, no matter what they do, they're going to get criticized, right? If they just gave guidance of like, well, here's what you could do, people be like, well, that's BS. You're just telling me I have to make it up. But if you had too much complexity, then it just gets clunky.
Then you just need a book for that alone, right?
Right, yeah, right.
Like then you have a player's handbook sized book is nothing but the races and every kind of variation you could possibly think of. It's tough because you think about it in the sense of like where D&D started, right? It's kind of like it takes heavily from Tolkien and some other places as well, but D&D was so small when it first started, and it's expanded, but not all of the parts of it have expanded equally, or there's been tons of supplements over the years with like, oh, here's your Arctic halflings, here's your Arctic dwarves, here's your jungle dwarves, and like, but like, but
and yet humans just human no matter what, they never adapt to where they're at.
Yeah.
Which is weird, but I guess that's your POV race, humans.
Yeah,
you can relate to that. Oh, somebody said, give a shout out. Hey, Sam Invader. Oh man, I was thinking of somebody said. Oh well, just lost it.
You mentioned Zoo Mafia, so I will say there's also a link in the description in addition to the Easy Roller Dice link for the promo code. Check out down there. There's also a link to the newsletter, and we're distributing the free quick start rules to Zoo Mafia RPG. If you want to check that out, it is down in the description, or you can just type in zoomafiarpg.com and that'll take you right to the newsletter, sign up, and you can get the quick start rules over there for free.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Christopher Spark, I think they're just talking about Tome of Beasts, and they said, yeah, the original one. Doesn't need a lot of monsters, but when I want to spice up combat encounter, I use it. It's funny. Like I don't like that. Isn't what interests me at all about those guys. It's like it's just the art and what that makes me think of. Like, oh, this would be neat. And like I mean, yes, a lot of them have neat features and stuff too. I'm not saying they don't, but like mostly it's just the art and thinking of what ideas it gives me, and I'm flipping through those books, so it's like I'm not looking like what's an aquatic monster that's like a CR 3 to 5 because they're in a watery place right now and they're fourth level or whatever,
So let's see, Sleepy Gaunt. Leonin race to use claws, which are natural weapons, plus paladin. Claws work with divine smite, plus monk flurry of blows equals plenty of damage, but burns through spell slots quick. What are your thoughts on this? It would also burn through your key points even quicker than your spell slots because you get even less of those, I think. I mean, it's fine, and it depends on what kind of game you're running. In one of my games, it would be fine because we don't do that much combat.
Yeah, right.
But depending if you're running the 6 to 8 combats per session, then you're gonna be done after 2 combats at most, or 1.5, right? It's funny. Someone reached out to me on social media, and they're like, "Do you think it'll break things if I let the paladin have healing word because they want healing word?" I'm like, "You mean something that'll have your paladins use less smite slots?" Sure, I'm all for that because in our game, paladins rarely ever cast spells. We've got like one paladin that casts spells, and that's because she's a new player and hasn't been jaded by optimizing like the mechanics, and they're like, oh, I want to do this thing, and I never deter that. I never say like I will never tell a new player not to play something because it's an inferior choice.
That's good because that's one of at least for me, because that's like I fucking hate when people do that to other people or me. It's just like because like a lot of the time, because I when I play paladins, like I do cast some spells and stuff because I don't give a shit about doing the most damage in combat or whatever.
My son was playing a Turtle Monk, and he started off as a 4 elements, and then he talked to another player, and they're like, "Why are you doing that? That one sucks." And so he's like, "Can I change it? I don't want to be this one. It sucks." And I'm like, "You can change it, but."
See, that's why I don't like it, because it's like you only are thinking it sucks because somebody told you that and made you feel stupid for doing the thing you thought was cool.
Yeah.
And like the paladins, at least from my perspective too, like why I don't like when people kind of like try to play your character for you. It's just like, I'm totally aware that I could probably do more damage with Divine Smite, but I don't want to. I want to play the character like this. They would cast the spells or whatever. They're not just, saving them for the big combat. Ooh, I see lots of question marks. How would you feel about adapting the plasmoid race into a symbiote, or would you let two players team up and have the plasmoid be in the other person's space at all times, almost like being born? I mean, I would explore any of those things if the players thought they'd be cool and interesting, and sure.
I mean, they like each player is still limited to what they can do. So, the only thing
Right.
different is they're sharing a space.
Yeah, when it comes to right, that's a great point. Like when it comes to that stuff, and to make it more on topic about races in general, whether it's like a player wants to play something that like there's no place for in my world, or like I hadn't thought about it, or like, oh, generally those things aren't liked, or whatever the heck.
Mm-hmm.
Who cares? It's like, I mean, I always think of things like, look, your world is ostensibly a planet, right? And maybe it's not as populated as Earth, but let's say there's like tens of millions of people. Is every tiefling going to be hated by every person, or is like, maybe they want to play that character, or maybe you want to be like a far traveler from another continent that's here, or whatever. It's like, maybe you want to play two plasmoids that are symbiotic. Or it's like, sure. I mean, if there's no real like mechanical, like you're not trying to be like, oh, cool, well now we can do this thing, blah blah blah, because you said we could do the same thing. It's like, if you just think it'd be fun, interesting way for the characters to be, sure, that sounds awesome. Let's go do it.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely explored different things in our own games, and I feel like most players that have been playing the game for a long time have been kind of like changing and adapting the races to their worlds all along anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not some of the features and abilities, but as far as like their lore and the
Sure.
the social constructs that they have, where it isn't the typical what you expect for a particular race or whatever. I know in the in my first campaign I ran for 5e, they were exploring these ruins for I think it was like a dragonborn society, but they were also finding like some connections, which was also underneath of uh, an area where a bunch of kobolds lived, and they're finding like these connections between the dragonborn and the kobolds, and it was forcing like the dragonborn members of the party to kind of like come to grips with some of their history and backstory of their race. And also the goblins liked in that game like needling that particular dragonborn, so like they were using it to kind of give them a hard time, and they would always bust the dragonborn's chops about their lack of tail. But it was a way to, but it was also because like in one of the things that like we were kind of alluding to in our world is that there's a much stronger connection between kobolds and dragonborn. Like maybe they're cousins, maybe they split from the same family tree at some point, and even in some parts of our world, we've done where actually kobolds and dragonborn actually hatch out of dragon eggs. And it's very rare that a dragon in that particular part of the world will actually have a dragon. They're going to hatch, more than likely they might hatch 5 kobolds from an egg or 2 dragonborn from an egg. They're really going off on this combo of barbarian wizard plasmoid symbiote in the chat.
Yeah, so like I was kind of like glancing at that. I think that this kind of like they said, oh, like I wear the plasmoid barbarian as a jello suit, so he takes the damage, like the wizard with that. And it's like, I'm my suspicion is there's like that's an example of like, oh, they're trying to like abuse the the thing you let them do. Which is like, I mean, I guess again, I'm not like the kind of games that it just comes down to the kind of games you play. Like I'm not running tactical games where like, it's all about surviving, multiple battles through attrition. So it's like, sure, if you want to do that, I think that can be really interesting. It's like you're going to take a lot of damage. I mean, like basically, if the player's doing that, it's like, well, you're telling me that the idea that this Jello suit can absorb a lot of damage is the fantasy you want to explore. So I'm going to hit you a lot so that you can play that, right? Like, you know, I'm saying, I don't mean in a mean way. I'm saying like that. Why else would you want to do that?
Yeah,
Other
yeah.
than
And also you then explore
you're
things
imagining
like
your character is super tough like
and also I'm envisioning the time that the barbarian goes unconscious and just sloughs off of the
that.
wizard, and the wizard's like standing in the middle of combat.
Yeah, with the big bad evil guy or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, or a bunch of the thugs or mooks or whatever, and be like, oh, this could go bad.
Right. And yeah, I think there's, you know, if you wanted to get like mechanical about it and crunchy, it's like, well, yeah, I think there's ways to make that interesting. It's like there could be benefits, but it's like maybe every time that your Jello suit gets hit and you're concentrating on a spell, you have to make a concentration check too. So it's like, you know, it's cool and beneficial, but there's some drawbacks too. So yeah, I think that'd be fun. I think they could be fun to explore.
Yeah, and then you have to figure out like who controls the movement. Or do
Mm-hmm.
they
Yeah,
both get to
right.
move, right? So
That's,
there's definitely some things that I think there's like good and bad, and
mm-hmm.
with any of that stuff, I generally try and figure out what is the player trying to do. Are they doing it in the spirit of they have a fun idea they want to explore, or are they just trying to get over on the GM?
Right, right. Yeah, that's the part. That's the stuff about DMing that you can't really give advice on. It's like I don't know. You just got to know the players, just like you just said. It's like are they trying to just one up you, or do they just think it'd be like a fun, cool idea?
Yeah, that's a good point. Good luck casting a spell when your suit is enraged. Like, if you're swinging with weapons and attacking, can you cast spells then that have somatic components because your limbs are being controlled by the barbarian?
I was just imagining they'd sort of both take their turns on their own turn, and you know maybe there could be that would actually be kind of a fun conversation for those two players too, where it's just like the barbarian rushes into battle and like it was like I don't want to be here, you know. It's like, but I, you know, like what about the opportunity attacks and stuff? It's like you know, it would just be fun. I think there'd be a lot of.
That sounds like a wizard problem to me.
Yeah, yeah. But like, you know, if they wanted, like, well, it's their turn, so they can move the body where they want. I mean,
yeah. So in your games, have you done much tweaking or playing with like different tropes or non-standard options for races?
yes and no. Most of my world building, I just did the classic starting with a small town and went out from there. And I really wanted to avoid just like assuming there was like mostly humans there and stuff, right? Because it's like, well, I like the idea of a fantastical world. So like whenever I'd make an NPC of just like somebody that lives in the town, I think like, well, what other race, you know, would be neat to explore? And so that became like a window into building those other parts of the world. Like, you know, why is there a furbolg tavern keeper in this town? It's like they're usually, you know, don't live in civilization. So it made me think like, well, what happened to his people? And then those things become like potential quests, you know, that I have in my back pocket under the character notes. It's like, well, if somebody got to talking to him and he explained that, I could totally see players because, you know, anything you say as a DM, they're going to think like, oh, this is really important, you know? So they might be like, we should probably go find this guy's lost tribe or whatever. And it's like, okay. And I mean, I'm sure he would love that, but it's not anything I like. The NPC themselves isn't like waiting for somebody to do that. That's just part of their life. But if players thought that was cool and wanted to do it, then they could go explore that part of the land and I'd have to build that. So I guess yes, in the sense of like I just tried to make like you know, I guess I just striving for diversity and just because it's fun to me. It's like I don't want to think everybody's human. It's like I like the idea, and I also don't like the idea that like you know like certain races are just like shunned or just because that's you know whether that smacks of real world stuff. Like I don't like that kind of stuff in my fantasy game. So it's just interesting to think like, well, what is their place in the world or like maybe they don't have, you know, maybe there isn't like a civilization for each race. It's like I don't know, they're just people. It's like they don't have to all be from the same, you know, forest or whatever.
I feel like in our earliest like version of Ulfganya, that was one of the things we kind of set out was to have some more distinct, communities of different races, so they
Yeah,
weren't
like the
just like
elves just don't
standard.
all live in the forest and wear robes and do magic and
Yeah,
stuff.
or at least trying to define them. And some of them were very traditional fantasy D&D tropes, and others were a bit different, or our own twist on it. Like one of our major kingdoms was Gronor, and that they basically were orcs that conquered a particular swath of land and integrated whatever races were there. So they're half orcs are pretty common, and humans and orcs live together. Which the orcs tended to be of a higher caste, but you know it wasn't like the humans were just enslaved. They just got absorbed into the into that community, and they built up a city, and it was renowned for. And it was actually, some of the lore was just taken from the old like D&D orc lore, where they're supposed to be really good at actually smithing weapons and working iron. So they kind of got known for that, and that was like a major export. And after a certain point, it was just like they were just another kingdom.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to not comment on that. I was enjoying your story, but Nerdy Buddha had an interesting comment. He said, Nerdarchy, I know Doug mentioned the Aasimar earlier, which I agree with his points. That's why in his Nordic setting, the Aasimar are fallen Valkyries playing on the fallen intro. That's a pretty cool take on them. Just like, again, it's just like, well, you're giving them more definition. Like, like, oh, I'm a celestial, I have celestial, but it's like, well, what does that mean? Like, how are you supposed to role play that? It's so vague, but like, that seems real cool, because it's like, you have something to hang your wings on, right? Of just like, that's why I'm an as, that's what it means to be a celestial. It's like, well, I, paved the road to Valhalla or whatever. That's cool.
Sleepy Gaunt always wanted to make a necromancer for a joke name, Sherlock Bones. Running joke is he is a world famous murder detective. However, he cheats. He just can't speak with dead and
That's
asks who
awesome.
killed them. And right, isn't that the crux of the struggle for every GM that wants to run a murder mystery? Because you're like, all right, how do I get around speak with dead, or this spell or that spell, or are they just going to cast locate object and solve this mystery?
I find I have a piece of general advice that applies to that. I've just kind of touched on in my editorial this week. Whenever there's like things like that, like tropes that are like, oh, this totally circumvents it. You know how you get around them? Lean into it. It's just like, know that going in. It's like, it's like, well, make that part of the challenge. It's like, yeah, you talk to this guy like he doesn't know who, like he didn't see anything, or whatever. It's like that.
Or it gives a description. I've never seen the person before. This is what they look like.
Right. It's like, yeah, you just like the best way to get around those challenges is just lean into them. It's just like, well, I'll just own it and make that part of the challenge. So that's my advice to you. Oh, let's see. Any tips and advice on making a necromancer build? Almost always multi-class. Well, I guess I would ask, like, what do you want to get out of necromancer? Like, to me, necromancer is somebody that like has undead minions. Like,
Yeah.
they don't want to get their hands dirty, and that they have skeletons or demons or devils, or, well, I guess that'd be
And every
undead.
battlefield is an opportunity.
Yeah. So I guess I mean, well, I know Sleepy Gaunt likes the like the hard mechanics. It's like, off the top of my head, I mean, just a wizard necromancers probably can't go wrong there. They got a lot of spell slots and things that both their necromancy.
You're either going to be a death
Oathbreaker
cleric,
paladin,
or you're going to be a necromancer wizard. I think.
maybe some Oathbreaker paladin if you can fit that in there, but that's like a DM, it's like the DMG.
It's well, I mean, with doing that, like anything you do, just kind of dilutes the thing that you're trying to be good at. For
Yeah.
Like we just did a video.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
That's not up yet, and we talk about it's for making an evil party. So we take like the most tropey subclasses and kind of mix and match them. But yeah, if you if you have an actual necromancer and an Oathbreaker paladin together, or a demon summoner, you can do some interesting things.
Mm-hmm.
There's some synergies there.
But yeah, and like to your point, in Sleepy Gun is almost always multi-classes, and it's like I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess we could throw out some multi-class ideas, but like you said, it's just like, well, it just kind of makes you worse at that, unless there is something specific you're trying to do. And I guess in that situation, it's like, well, what you're trying to do is create and control as many undead as you can, and multi-classing is going to diminish that, no matter
Yeah,
how
because
you
you're not
say
going to
it.
get access. It's going to take longer to get access to those spells.
Right.
Because you're going to want. Yeah, I mean, and really, the thing is, you only need 2 spells, right? And you're kind of then you're
Animate dead and can create undead. Or
yeah.
well, there's summon undead spirit now. I guess yeah, you know what? I would say that that's pretty versatile and probably better than like just it's like, well, there has to be bodies to make zombies, blah blah blah. I would say look at that spell and build it around that, like casting that as much or whatever it is. Like if there's ways to like if you upcast it, it has more powerful. I don't know. It's probably based on your proficiency bonus, but
And then you don't have to worry about hiding your undead all the time.
yeah. So I would say build it around that. And in that regard, it's like, well, then maybe multi-classing, like maybe something like sorcerer or something, depending on like if you have a lot of encounters in a day and you're going through those spirits, like earning points to get more slots to cast that. Because I don't think it's a high level spell, maybe like 2 or 3. So
3rd level for Animate Dead.
No, the Create Undead Spirit, the newer one.
Yeah, that is like 2nd or 3rd as well.
Right. So it's just like something, since it's a low level spell, it's like, well, then like I said, if you're maybe just go play a sorcerer, right? If it's on their spell list, I don't know if it is or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So Steven getting ready to play a Grung roguelike in Radiant Citadel, first time playing Lawful Evil. Group is all good aligned. Any tips? I mean, you need to find a reason. Yeah, exactly. You need to find a reason to work with the players and get along with the other players and have goals that are aligned with them. And right. Also, unless you're going to end up being the villain at some point and turning on the group.
Oh, actually, I know we only got a lot of time left, but I was like, we gotta have a CBG that is all about the necromancer. We have 2 that feature the Wizard School of Necromancy, but one of them I totally forgot is one of my favorite ones, mostly because I like the NPC.
Is it the Master of Undeath?
The Master of Undeath.
Yeah.
That's my favorite NPC that we've made, but that is a Circle of Spores Druid and Wizard of Necromancy what do you call it, multi-class. Let me get the link. I'll drop it in there. It's all our CBGs, which we got like 70 of them, are pay what you want, and they all have a level by level character breakdown and also a DM version that is like a stat block based on the character version. So there you go. What was that guy's name? Something Sleepy Guy. Or anybody else. I just dropped the link in the chat.
Yeah.
And Sleepy Guy. Wow. Hey, we should pay this guy for marketing because we literally have that too. It's the tiniest wrestler.
We do have a Grung grappler.
A Grung grappler. Yeah, I grab that too. Here you go. Have fun. Download them all, Sleepy Guy. There, I'll pay what you want. And if you want to give us some money for it, I won't complain. But if not, have fun.
I think our Whirling Dervish character build is a rogue barbarian.
Totally is. I'm not even gonna get the link. You can just explore it over there. It's absolutely, and that was kind of like a cool narrative take too. It was like I think it was a rogue archaeologist because it was just based on like he had a lot of skills and he just like it was an anthropologist because he immersed himself in the culture of wherever he was and just learned this like.
We kind of flavored the rage as like them doing like
a blade dance. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. As you mentioned, we have a lot of character builds over there, and like they're just the ones with the guides. Because if you look at the channel, there's a bunch too where we didn't before we started doing the guides. So we might have 100 or more.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Long before Tulak the Barbarian, we were over here whittling away, making.
Yeah, for everybody that leaves a comment like, "Oh, Tulak did this," like, "Well, yeah, go over his channel and tell him we did all the shit, or except for the anime." I'm just kidding. There's no beef.
We don't have No, the point is we've made a lot of character builds over the years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we started back in 2014 and we're in 2022 now, so that's 8 years now we've been at it. So that's a lot of character builds.
Yeah. Yeah. See, now they're talking about like, where do you store your bodies for your necromancer? It's like, just undead spirit, man. You can
Stories
however you want. It can appear wherever you want.
Well, that's why the Spore Druid is nice too, because you can make temporary zombies that are there for a little while, do their thing, and then go away. Although,
man,
they just make me think of infected Terrans. So from StarCraft.
One of I played a Circle of Spore Druids in a stream game for like a year and a half with Sean McGovern. It went from like first to like 11th level or something. Yeah. But and it was like we were playing like his version of Greyhawk and like the dungeon. But there was like a lot of, we always had like hirelings and stuff, and we
you were doing XP for gold, right? Your gold was your XP,
Yep. But and they would die a lot, and then when I got that, I used to like, if I didn't tell the other characters that I could do that, and like one of the NPC hirelings like died in battle, and I was like, did anybody see that happen? And they're like, no, they're over here. And I was like, I'm gonna use my reaction to make him a zombie and like carry stuff out with us. And they were like, oh man, I can't believe he lived. And I was like, yeah, he died back there.
His body is shambling around following you for the next minute or 10 minutes or whatever it is. Yeah. So on that note, it is just past the time. We'll be back tomorrow night, and we are going to be doing Those Bastards. It was our second episode. We did the first one, then we took a week off because Nerdarchy's Ted was globetrotting. But we'll be back tomorrow night at 8:30 p.m., just a little bit later. And then we also have the live chat 12 p.m. Eastern in the afternoon on Friday. We've got a D&D TikToker on, Vex Wild, so we're talking to them. So lots of fun stuff. Plus tomorrow we were dropping a video on, basically we're talking about 1D&D, backgrounds, cultures, and races. It's a little lengthy, but eventually we get around to the point. So you can check that out tomorrow morning.
Very good point.
For sure. In the link, you can find a one-time discount code for 25% off of Easy Roller Dice, as well as if you would like to check out our quick start rules for Zoo Mafia RPG, you can get them for free. Just sign up for that particular newsletter. Link is in the description. And until next time, everyone, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.